How's everybody doing tonight? Good. So I have the daunting task of playing some music, talking about connecting the dots of my most favorite musician of all time and my most favorite era of his of all time, the 1940s and 50s. So there's a lot of things that I could say and that I want to talk about, so I'm going to try to pick and choose what's most useful for all of you. But this series is called Jazz Speaks, and I think in most ways music says more than talking does. Music says more than speaking does. So we're going to let the music speak for most of this evening, but I do have some things to say. What I gathered from looking at Miles's trajectory from the 40s and the 50s is that small moments can change the trajectory of anyone, can change everything. And in the 1940s, you know, Miles was a young guy in East St. Louis, which back then was like a conservatory for jazz musicians in St. Louis. It was its own incubator. And like I was in college and high school, he was really hungry for knowledge and trying to figure out how the people he admired could do what they do. So at some point, you know, Billy Eckstine, a great band leader, came to St. Louis, and then many times in the 40s, but he came to St. Louis at one point, and in Billy Eckstine's band was Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie, which are names I'm sure you all are familiar with. This is an educated audience. But Miles Davis was a big fan of Dizzy Gillespie. And if you listen to early Miles, he plays just like Dizzy Gillespie, but an octave lower, you know. And I've had teachers that told me a lot, you know, when I was young, like, always go talk to the musicians when you hear them. Always trying to make a connection. And I wasn't great at that, if I'm honest, like when I was really young. But those moments, the teachers tell you that because those moments can change everything for you. So in the 1940s, Billy Eckstine was playing at a club on Del Mar called the Riviera. Not like on Del Mar, you know, where all the businesses are and everything, but the other way, the opposite way, past that church of Scientology or whatever it is, that direction. Billy Eckstine would play there many times. And one day, a trumpet player got sick, and Miles Davis was down there. And Dizzy Gillespie was like, we don't have a trumpet player tonight. Miles, do you have a union card? This is young Miles. He's like, yeah, I can do it. And he filled in on third trumpet. And playing with Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker completely changed his life. Not just hearing them, but playing with them. And from that moment on, you know, he decided that's what I have to do. I feel weird talking about this like I was there. I wasn't there. I mean, I you know, like, I wasn't. Victor Goines, the great Victor Goines. Round of applause for Victor Goines. You know, when I was in graduate school, I went to Northwestern when he was the program director there, and he let me have a breakfast with Ellis Marsalis, Wynton Marsalis' father. Because I was trying to figure out as a jazz educator, like, what do you teach kids, but most importantly, what do you not teach them? And as I was talking about, like, all the music theory and all the jazz theory and all the theory, Ellis Marsalis told me, jazz theory is just that. It's a theory, which means it's something that has yet to be proven. And I say that now because, like, I wasn't there. So when I'm talking to you, I'm telling you stuff I've read or I've heard, or I've had the luxury because of a great teacher I had when I was young, Ronald Carter, who taught at Lincoln High School. I had the great privilege of talking and mingling with some people that were there. Jimmy Heath, Curtis Fuller, among many others. And I asked them these questions and talked to them about it. But I just want to say that I wasn't there. So if I get something wrong, please don't come for me in the comments. But Miles, you know, that night with Billy Eckstine, or those nights with Billy Eckstine at the Riviera, I assume it was the Riviera, changed his life because he wanted to play just like Dizzy and play with Charlie Parker. And I don't think people talk about it enough, but St. Louis was an integral part of that circuit of jazz history. There's a lot of great musicians who came through St. Louis. So that moment when Miles was a 19, 18-year-old, 17-year-old kid sitting in with the band because somebody couldn't make it, but he had the courage to be around the musicians, changed his life. So we're gonna start with a song by the great Charlie Parker that Miles would play with him later. It's called Alucha, and it's a contrafact of Honeysuckle Rose and rhythm changes, and we hope you enjoy it. Thank you guys so much for coming out tonight. One, two, one, two, This is a Jazz Speak series, so I must talk, but my God, the music speaks a whole lot more than what anything I would have to say. So that's Mr. Carlos Brown on the alto saxophone. St. Louis's own Carlos Brown, and also St. Louis's own Mr. Kendrick Smith on the tenor saxophone. Also St. Louis's own Mr. Adam Manis on the piano. On the bass, showing you his funky bottom this evening, this is Christian Dillingham on the acoustic bass. And on the drum is my brother. He's St. Louis's own. He claims Fort Wayne, but he was in Baldwin. You know, he was in Baldwin. Y'all know Cliff, Miss Bradley. My brother from another mother, that's Cliff Wallace on the drums. You know, so when Miles heard Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie, that changed everything for him. And when I listen to young Miles, and from things I've read and I've heard him say, you know, Dizzy Gillespie was kind of his cat, the guy he wanted to sound like. And he knew everything that Dizzy played, and he couldn't play all of it. I mean, to be honest, I haven't heard anybody that could play like Dizzy Gillespie to this day. Maybe John Faddis, but Dizzy is a very special individual. So when he heard Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie and he sat in with them, you know, in St. Louis when he was young, he was convinced, I have to do that. But Dizzy and Charlie Parker were in New York City. Miles Davis's father was one of the wealthiest men in the state of Illinois. He was a dentist, and he was able to afford to send young Miles, who asked him, to Juilliard to study music in New York City. So Miles went to New York to study at Juilliard. But if I'm honest, like I said, I wasn't there. But it sure seemed like he was just trying to follow after Dizzy and Charlie Parker to be a part of this new thing, this bebop thing that Charlie Parker had pioneered, this language that was created by an absolute genius. So Miles went to Juilliard, and I don't imagine that back then they even had a jazz program, but Miles went to Juilliard to study music, and he studied music theory and all of those things. And at one point I heard that he had a professor that told him, you know, that blues is the music of downtrodden people that have had awful experiences, that, you know, shackles and this and that. And Miles stood up and said, I didn't have any of that. I didn't have no shackles. I'm not downtrodden. My daddy got money. And I can play the blues. So you a liar. And he walked out of the classroom. So after a couple years, he kind of left Juilliard because he had found Charlie Parker. You know, back then, 52nd Street was like this district where all the jazz clubs, where there was a speaker outside of all the clubs. You could hear what was going on at the Three Deuces and all these places. And Miles was really probably hanging out of those places, looking for Charlie Parker, looking for Dizzy, didn't find him. And then one day, Charlie Parker came up behind him and said, I heard you was looking for me. And he's like, yeah, I was looking for you. And he would follow Charlie Parker around, I'm sure, like I followed musicians around in Chicago, and many of these musicians have. And he learned everything that Dizzy played. And then one day, Dizzy got an opportunity that forced him to leave Charlie Parker's band. And that was an opportunity because somebody came to Charlie Parker and said, I want to book you at my club, but you don't have a trumpet player. And they said, Charlie Parker grabbed Miles and said, I got one right here. Here he is. This is a trumpet player right here. And they booked him, and Miles became the trumpet player in Charlie Parker's band. And that sounds like a small thing, but that's not a small thing. I tell students that I have now and students that I've had before, like, if you really want to play, find the people that you admire, learn their music, learn every note, ask them questions, follow them around, and just try to make a connection. And most students don't listen to me. And I didn't listen to my teachers when they told me that too. But in this moment, this made Miles Davis the trumpet player in Charlie Parker's band after he left, which became the training ground for Miles in New York City. And he couldn't play everything like Dizzy. He couldn't play like him. He couldn't play all of the songs, but he did his best because he wanted to learn. And I read things where Miles was so nervous every night he could barely even make it through the sets. But this training ground would become his, not just training ground, but his platform for people to hear this great young trumpet player who they wouldn't have otherwise known because he was from St. Louis. East St. Louis. That's my mom right there correcting me. You're right. East St. Louis, St. Louis. He wasn't from New York, is what I'm saying. Before I was interrupted. All right, we're going to continue on. And everybody heard this great young trumpet player that was playing with Charlie Parker. And Miles felt strongly at the beginning, from what I've read and people I've talked to, that he couldn't hang with Charlie Parker's band. He didn't fit, but he wanted to learn so bad he would just show up every day. But after a while, he grew kind of tired of that. And he was looking for something else. There was a great piano player named Tad Dameron who would take Miles Davis, after hearing him with Charlie Parker, to Paris when Miles was 23. And when Miles went to Paris, he was like a huge paradigm shift in his life because he had never been out of the country. And when he went to Paris, he found out that like the racism that exists in America is not in France. I mean, it's different, or whatever it is over there, because I ain't been there either, but he didn't experience what he experienced here. And he experienced that people of all colors respect black music, which is what jazz is, and they respect black Americans. And he was kind of left to be himself. And it was kind of like, oh my gosh, I've never been in a place like this. This is amazing. And when he came back, when he came back to the States after that trip in Paris, it was, from what I read, it was really hard for him. And he was struggling just with his sense of self and life in general, and he fell into some things that I won't talk about because I don't want to state another man's grief, but from what I can tell, he went through some things. And at some point, he was doing some things he wasn't supposed to be doing. And his dad came up from East St. Louis. Now, this is Jimmy Heath that I heard this from. His dad came up from East St. Louis at a concert that he was playing with Jimmy Heath, and came up and said, "You coming home with me," and took him out of the club and said, "You got to get right," and took him back to East St. Louis because Miles was messing up. I shouldn't say that, but he needed to go back home for a reset. And he went back home, and he spent some time with his family. Now, that brings us to the next song we're going to play. When I was in college, one of my close friends, Ryan Neither, showed me this recording of Miles that I never heard of. And I'm a Miles Davis nerd. Like, I love Miles' playing. Every trumpet player is not like that. Some trumpet players like Miles, some don't. Miles is the reason that I play. And Ryan Neither said, "You heard this recording called Our Delight with Jimmy Forrest and Miles Davis?" And I said, "No." And I listened to it, and it was some of the best Miles I ever heard. Recorded in 1952, as historical records suggest, at the Barrel Club, or the Barrel Lounge, which was also on Del Mar in St. Louis at the time in 1952. Now, if records are correct, that would directly line up with the time that Miles had to come home from New York and get his head right, and he would have just so happened to have been here with a tenor titan that was from St. Louis named Jimmy Forrest, who played with Duke Ellington and many people. And it was recorded right on Del Mar. And I was like, man, this sounds incredible. And we're going to play a song from this record. It's called Our Delight. I think there's a couple vinyl pressings of it, but mostly it's digital. That was a Jimmy Forrest record, but featured a young Miles Davis playing a song by Ray Brown, bass player, and Gil Fuller, entitled Ray's Idea. So this is Ray's Idea. two. I don't know who that was, but thank you. Oh, the man. So before Miles went home to East St. Louis, actually I heard it was Millstat. I heard his dad, he sent him to Millstat to get it together. Before he went home, he was hanging out at an apartment of a composer and arranger by the name of Gil Evans. And it was Gil Evans who changed Miles's whole conception about how he heard music. Gil Evans is a great arranger, but when I listen to his music, I hear him as a master of timbre and orchestration, like the way he picks certain instruments to play certain intervals that rub together in a certain kind of a way that make you feel something. Duke Ellington was the same way. He was just a master of orchestration. So Miles was hanging out with Gil Evans in New York a lot. And Gil Evans was turning Miles on to Ravel and Shostakovich, all these classical composers, and Miles was pulling ideas from those people. And that didn't just influence the way Miles heard music. It didn't just influence the way Miles would write music. It also influenced the way that he played. Because before that, Miles was following behind Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie. And he was emulating that bebop style, which I've heard people say is not listenable. I would beg to differ. I find it listenable if you're listening for the right things. If you're listening for genius. But, certain people were into bebop, certain people weren't, but I don't know how many of those people realize what Charlie Parker and the beboppers were really doing. They were pioneering a new language of music, and that's not something that happens very often. Stravinsky, Bach, Charlie Parker. I said what I said. So Miles was hanging out with Gil Evans and asking him all these questions about what's the meaning of that note and why did you arrange it like this? And Gil Evans was showing Miles what he was doing. And together in the late 40s, I think it was 1949, they recorded an album called The Birth of the Cool, which was a larger ensemble recording that featured a lot of forward-thinking musicians, many of which I would say didn't come from the same school of musical thought that Miles was coming from. Miles was coming right out of Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie. Lee Konitz, who was on that record, was coming out of Lenny Tristano, which was coming out of bebop, but it was a different school of thought. Gunther Schuller was he was a jazz thinker, but I wouldn't call him a jazz musician. And there was all these different musicians together kind of executing this vision of Miles and Gil Evans. And that record was groundbreaking. They recorded it in the late 40s, but it would not be released until much later, which is why I kind of programmed it at this section of the show. But if you haven't heard The Birth of the Cool, a lot of people haven't heard it. But if you haven't heard The Birth of the Cool, when you go back and listen to it, you're hearing a lot of musicians from different traditions within the jazz diaspora, but you're also hearing an arranger and a trumpet player and other musicians who are masters of economy of space. All of those songs on The Birth of the Cool are 3-4 minutes long. When you listen to most jazz songs, not just albums, but songs, they're an 8-minute song or a 9-minute or 10-minute song, which is nice, but because that gives musicians a chance to stretch and tell the story. But on The Birth of the Cool, and in a lot of the big band records that came before that, you didn't have that time. You had to tell your story in 30 seconds, or 10 seconds, or 15 seconds, or 20 seconds. And I really love going back to listen to Harry Sweets Edison on big band records and other musicians on big band records. Because when they have a solo, you don't get the chance to stretch. You got 12 bars to play something that serves the song and that feels right. And if you listen to The Birth of the Cool, that's what you hear, not just from Miles, but from all of the different musicians. And you also hear Gil Evans' masterful orchestration. So the next song we're going to the next song we're going to play I mean, they recording it, I'm not recording. But the next song we're gonna play is called Boplicity, which was one of my favorite songs from The Birth of the Cool. And from research I did, I found out that this song is licensed to Miles's mother. I'm not sure why, but I know that from what I read, Miles and Gil Evans wrote it, but I think they might have wanted to put it in a different publishing house or something. But this is a song that Miles and Gil Evans wrote together called Boplicity, and I think it kind of defines the transition from bebop to hard bop of the early 50s and the bebop of the late 40s. That whole record, not just the song. So we're gonna play Boplicity by Miles Davis. Round of applause for Patrick Skinner, front of house. He's not just doing the sound. He's not just making the musicians feel comfortable and knowing all of the intricacies of you all getting here and the music starting, but he also brought me this fancy face towel. Because I'd be sweating. So, the Birth of the Cool was recorded in, y'all all got phones, so you'll probably tell me if I'm wrong, but I think it was 1949. Please don't come for me. And when he went home and had to take some time off to get himself in tip-top shape, I don't want to state another man's grief, but, after that period, the late 40s, early 50s, Miles, in my opinion, it's not talked about enough, the comeback he made. He took some time off to get himself together and then came back to New York, thanks to his dad helping him refocus. And he was booked for the Newport Jazz Festival. And at the Newport Jazz Festival, he brought a band, and there were a whole bunch of musicians, Thelonious Monk, Art Blakey, many names that you've heard of. And at this festival, though, from what I heard, he played Round Midnight, which is a Thelonious Monk ballad. And he put his horn up to the mic with the harmony muted and played in a way I guess people weren't used to hearing. But for Miles, he was like, this is how I always play. This is who I am. But it was different from Dizzy Gillespie. It was different from a lot of his predecessors who he learned from, Roy Eldridge, Louis Armstrong, all of the names. And when he was playing in Newport, there was someone who worked for Columbia Records named George Avakian, who heard Miles play Round Midnight. He's like, I got to get that. I need to record that. So after Miles played at Newport, small moments I've noticed like kind of change Miles's trajectory. Hearing Dizzy Gillespie, Charlie Parker, and sitting in with him, and hanging out with Gil Evans and learning from Gil Evans, and playing at Newport. All of those things were huge paradigm shifts for Miles Davis's career. So when George Avakian heard him, he said, I want you to come to Columbia. And Miles Davis was like, oh, I already got a contract with Prestige Records. And George Avakian just kept offering Miles more luxuries. And eventually Miles Davis was like, okay, yes. But I'm still obligated to my responsibilities with Prestige Records. So after the Newport Jazz Fest, Miles had a stipulation in his contract with Columbia that allowed him to record for Columbia, but it could not be released until he fulfilled his contract with Prestige. So from the 50s, early 50s, through the mid-50s, it gets a little cloudy in terms of like what was recorded when versus when it came out. Does that make sense? So, Birth of the Cool was recorded in 49. I don't think the Birth of the Cool came out until 57. But after the Newport Jazz Festival, Miles went and recorded for Columbia a famous quintet record called Round Midnight, where he played Round Midnight. And John Coltrane is on it and many others. And it's probably my top 3 favorite Miles quintet records, Round Midnight. So he goes to record Round Midnight, but it's not released yet. And then after that, he has to record a lot of material to fulfill his responsibilities for Prestige. So it gets a little convoluted there. But we're going to play a song from Round Midnight. And when I was younger, I thought this was a Christmas song. Because my family had my parents had this cassette tapes of stuff that was recorded. It was probably my mom's dad or maybe somebody, and they had these little cassette tapes of stuff that was recorded from the radio. I don't know when it was recorded. It definitely wasn't recorded in the 50s, but it had like Eddie Kendricks and The Temptations and some other stuff. And then randomly in there was a song by Miles Davis that I didn't know was Bye Bye Blackbird, which was from the Round Midnight record that Miles would record for Columbia. And I thought it was a Christmas song because I was a little kid And I love that song. And I would hear Miles play the melody, and then after he played the melody, he would solo, and then after the solo, John Coltrane would play. I'd be like, man, I don't know what this saxophone player is doing, but I love this trumpet player. And it's really interesting to be here full circle after listening to that as a kid and not knowing what it was, going to college for music, finding out what it was, and now being asked to come back to my hometown of St. Louis and play this song, Bye Bye Blackbird, which featured, I'll go into this later, but it featured an introduction by Red Garland, who was Miles's piano player on this record. Miles was a master for choosing musicians, which I'll talk about later, but the introduction to Bye Bye Blackbird still sticks out in my mind as like one of the moments where I was like, I think I might like jazz, even as a kid. So Adam Manis is gonna play this introduction by Red Garland. This is Bye Bye Blackbird from Round Midnight by Miles Davis. There's a lot of great songs on that record Miles did for George Avakian in Columbia, that first record before the Prestige recordings were done. Bye Bye Blackbird is one of them. Around Midnight is one of them. Ted's Delight is one of them. I don't know if this is one of them for a lot of other people, but I always liked the song on Round Midnight by Cole Porter called All of You. That Miles recorded many times. He recorded it live, that famous My Funny Valentine recording from the 60s with George Coleman on it, and many other times. But we're going to play All of You from that first Columbia record, Round Midnight. This is All of You. I've talked a lot at you this evening about how we got from 1949 to, at this point, the mid-50s, but I'm joined by a lot of incredible musicians right now. Just like Miles was, and one thing Miles was great at is he let the different musicians have space to be themselves, even if it meant sometimes he was outshined, because the music is always the guide, the music is always king. So after Miles got offered that Columbia contract after playing the Newport Jazz Fest, he was already forward thinking about what music he wanted to make later. So he put his band together. He had John Coltrane, Cannonball Adderley, Bill Evans, Wynton Kelly, Red Garland sometimes on piano, Paul Chambers on the bass, Jimmy Cobb on the drums, sometimes Philly Joe on the drums. And it's a testament to Miles' genius because he was really good at picking musicians that would make the music sound great or execute his vision in a way that was listenable, right? Like a lot of times musicians get together and we play and we're all trying to play good. And you hear the first guy get up, he plays his solo and it's good. And the next guy get up, he plays his solo or her solo and it's good. And the next person is good. But Miles was really good at picking people who, first you hear Miles and he does his thing. But the next person that comes next does something very different. And that makes the music that much more accessible, makes it easy to listen to. So when Miles got that contract at Columbia, he was like, I got to get out of this prestige contract. And he had a lot of music left to record. So he went into the studio and recorded, I think this has to be like a historical feat in the world of recorded jazz. He recorded so much music in such a short time to finish his prestige contract. And oddly enough, this music that they were kind of trying to just finish and record are my favorite Miles Davis records. These were the records that like, oh, I think I might want to play music. And at that time, he was counting off tunes that he had done with his working band, recording them to move on. That would be Relaxing with the Miles Davis Quintet, Cooking with the Miles Davis Quintet, Working with the Miles Davis Quintet, all of those quote, quote, Miles Davis Quintet. Those were my favorite records. And all of those musicians were really integral to making that music special. And that would get us from the early 50s and Miles recording songs that he liked and some songs that he wrote to Kind of Blue, which would change the shape of jazz and American music later. But I would be remiss if I just stood up here and I was the only person that talked to you tonight, because you have some incredible artists and musicians up here right now. So Miles was the engine behind it. Miles was the visionary. And he picked the right musicians, but they all brought something special. So I want to take a second before we play our next song, which is from Relaxing with the Miles Davis Quintet, called If I Were a Bell. I want to take a second real quick to let each of these musicians tell you what the role that they're reprising right now brought to that recording. So right now, reprising his role as Red Garland, we've got St. Louis's own, Mr. Adam Manis. Can you talk just for a brief moment about what Red Garland did that was so special?
I sure will. Give it up for Quentin Coaxum and this amazing band, everybody, real quick. Incredible stuff. So there's so much to talk about with Red Garland. Red Garland was this incredibly elegant soloist who had incredibly crystal clear language when he soloed. But I want to talk about a little bit what you were talking about, which is Miles hires for the band. And what I love about Red's playing, almost more than anything, is the way that he played with the rhythm section and he supported all the soloists, because, we're piano players. We like chords, right? We love chords. And Red Garland was ahead of the time. I don't mean ahead of his time. He was literally ahead of the time. So can we do maybe like a rhythm changes real quick? So you might hear a piano player play like everything right on each beat, right on the chord. So it's not like 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. sounds pretty good. But Red Garland started doing this thing in Miles' band, which we still call like the Red Garland rhythm, where he would put all of those chords like a split second ahead of where they landed, so that the audience gets it in their ear just like a little bit before they're supposed to. And what it does is it makes the music feel like it's going downhill, and then it also puts like the map of the song in your ear before. It's like a really tightly written script in a movie where it's like you're never lost in the plot. And when Red Garland's playing, you're never lost in the song. You always know where you are. That sounds like this.
That's Adam Manis on the piano.
Yes, sir. All right. I am. Oh, sorry. All good. All right. I am fulfilling or attempting to fulfill the role of Julian Cannonball Adderley, who happens. Yeah, one time for Cannonball. Yeah. I'm dealing with some jazz heads in the house on this evening. So, but Cannonball, he brought the. I would like to think he brought the fun. He was very big in stature, but he was light on his feet. And if I could like think of like just his sound, or even the way that he would glide through chord changes, it was almost as graceful as a ballet dancer. Had a huge appetite, but the way that he breezed through courses. So again, like Quinn said, I was not there. Let me just share that I was not there, but what I've heard and read, he had a huge appetite, but he just had a love for the music, and he just knew how to bring the fun to the party. So that's what we're here to do. I'm here to bring the vibe to the party. So Cannonball Adderley.
It don't even feel right to say I'm trying to do like John Coltrane, but I guess, but I am stepping in that role this evening, and I guess for me, I've just kind of picked up the tenor not too long ago. I mostly, play alto, but I picked up the instrument because of John Coltrane. I really wanted to get inside of some of the things that he was doing. I mean, because you can do it on alto, but when you play the same instrument, you really start to get a concept. And he was known for playing a lot of notes. They would call it sheets of sound. And all my life, I've been told I play too many notes. But but my heroes were Charlie Parker, who played. And when I discovered John Coltrane, I was like, hey, that's somebody that, And so inside of John Coltrane, it's not just a bunch of notes, but he had a way of being musical and quoting the melodies inside of it. And it's really mastery. It's like almost like you're walking, both directions at once. You have all this stuff happening, but then it's like this melody and this musicality, and it's just really forward way of thinking. So, I hope you all are getting that out tonight. So.
I could easily talk about Paul Chambers for the duration of this whole concert. He's been one of the biggest influences on me as a bass player and a musician, I think, for hopefully anybody that plays this instrument. There's certain musicians on every instrument that their influence on the music and their influence on the instrument is unavoidable, in my opinion. I don't think you can play this music and play this instrument without really studying Paul Chambers, because in such a short amount of time, his body of work is really unbelievable. I believe he died at 34, and if you look at all the records he's on, it's mind blowing to hear what he did in most of the time, probably one or two takes. He's coming in, and what you hear, it's like that. It's as real as it gets. And I think something that also doesn't get talked about a lot with Paul Chambers is, in my opinion, he's the best arco soloist of all time. What he did with the bow is really, I don't think, been there hasn't been anything since to rival what he accomplished. There's so many recordings where that wasn't. You have people like Slam Stewart, but the amount of recordings where he chose to take a bowed solo is really remarkable. In addition to a sound that is just iconic, you know, and really kind of, you know, all those classic recordings, his sound, and he worked so much to, you know, really hone in on capturing the sound he was trying to put out there and trying to support a band with. And of course, he comes out of the Detroit, bass city. It still blows my mind to think of Paul Chambers and Ron Carter at Cass Academy in the high school orchestra, and I think it's probably safe to say that, Ron Carter may not have been Ron Carter without having an older classmate of Paul Chambers. I mean, that influence, I think, is a really deep connection and blows my mind to think about. So, God bless Paul Chambers.
What y'all don't know is Quentin left the stage because he knows I can talk a lot. I'm not going to do that to y'all because I'd actually prefer to play. But I'm playing the role of actually two people if we're playing roles tonight. Loosely, I guess. Actually, maybe 3 to 4 people if we count all the music that we're playing. If we go from, let's say, Ray's Idea, when we played Ray's Idea earlier, on that recording was Art Blakey. And a lot of y'all clapping because you know. So Art Blakey was the preeminent drummer of his time, and he created a band called Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, which is pretty much a university of music that spans from a foundation of, I'd say bebop if you could make a collective of how it started with I don't want to spend too much time with names, but with Donald Byrd and Horace Silver and things like that. But then it goes on to, we end with Branford Marsalis. It's like a lineage of people that Art Blakey was responsible for in many ways of creating what we know of in here as jazz. He was known to be like kind of a fiery drummer, he took very, very long-winded drum solos that nobody ever minded. And I think, if you talk about drums, everybody feel like drums are the most popular instrument ever, And if you really think about it, not even have to think about it, if you know, next to our voices, drums are actually the oldest instrument in the universe. Rhythm is what our heartbeats are based off of rhythm and things like that. So there's a reason why the drum position, there might be a multitude of reasons why there might be multiple positions in way Miles Davis chose so many different drummers. Now there are reasons why there was a switch there. We won't get into that, but so if we move on, we have later on we would have Philly Joe Jones join the band with the Prestige years, with Ira Bell, and on to the Columbia years, which would include all of you, and Around Midnight, and so these are all like, if you ask any drummer, at least any drummer who has studied and spent some time with jazz, they'll all put Art Blakey and Philly Joe Jones in their Mount Rushmore. I promise you. I'll take it to Vegas. And the third drummer in this mix would be another person who I personally have him on Mount Rushmore, and I was able to call him a mentor for a minute. His name is Jimmy Cobb. And give Jimmy Cobb some. So I can't really place a 1, 2, or 3. If you ask me any other day, they'll all switch and be. It just depends on how I'm feeling. But they all are very much different. For anybody who listens enough, you can hear within 2 beats which one is which. Almost like you can hear the difference between your mom and your dad's voice on the phone. Like, seriously, like it's that thick for some people. And Miles Davis was able to hear those things. Jimmy Cobb took Philly Joe's spot in the band. The band stayed the same. Jimmy Cobb, for whatever reason, there's a lot of history and reasons why Philly Joe wasn't in that band, and for good or for bad. But Jimmy Cobb ended up taking his place until a young Tony Williams would come, and then we have Herbie Hancock, and that book, it never ends. So, but those 3 musicians, and I call them musicians, a lot of people like to separate drummers from musicians, and I stone that, If you've ever listened to Max Roach, you say different. But, you know, and even these three gentlemen. So those three people within just the ride cymbal alone, if you listen deep enough, you can hear three different approaches to where they play it. But it all established one medium of groove that nobody could deny. And that's the reason why you were able to hear all of this music. It's the reason why you were able to hear Train, Cannonball, Miles, Red Garland, Paul Chambers. It's the motor behind all of it. Miles was able to pick that out. And there were a lot of drummers. Elvin Jones, you know, you name them. And Miles Davis was able to pick the pick of the litter. So yeah, like you said, I talk a lot.
That's my guy right there. Round of applause for Cliff Wallace on the drums. That's the Grammy music right there from Adam Manns. I got nervous. I was like, let's everybody say something real quick. All of us, not just Cliff, all of us could talk about these records for a long time. And we're getting close to the end. But are y'all doing all right? Okay, all right. So we got a few more for you, but this next one, Cliff mentioned If I Were a Bell and Philly Joe Jones. This is from Relaxing with the Miles Davis Quintet. And it's probably, I hesitate to say it, like Cliff was saying, it's hard to pick your Mount Rushmore, but this is definitely in my top 3 of Miles Davis Quintet records of any era, Relaxing. So we're gonna play If I Were a Bell from the musical Guys and Dolls by Frank Lozier, as played by Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Cannonball, Philly Joe, Paul Chambers, and Red Garland. So I mentioned at the beginning of our evening together that some small moments really affected Miles's trajectory. Sitting in with Billy Eckstein, playing with Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie, hanging out with Gil Evans, and playing at Newport. Those were regular, everyday things. I read something where Miles said, I don't understand why everybody loved that solo at Newport on Around Midnight so much. I was just playing like I always play, which is often the case, you know, for musicians. And all of a sudden someone runs up to you and says something that you did something special. And he would go on to choose one of the greatest bands in history with Cannonball and John Coltrane and others that you've heard the musicians on the stage talk about. And all of those things combined would influence Miles to do something that he thought yet again was just another day in his life, another record. He would record an album called Kind of Blue, which is one of the greatest jazz records of all time. It might still be the greatest selling jazz album of all time. But a lot of what I've read about Miles and what he said is I went into the studio and I had this idea about modal playing, which for lack of a better term and not to get too convoluted, you know, is about playing with certain scales within a mode of music and not playing what he came out of, which was Charlie Parker and bebop and playing all these fast notes and these lines, which you've heard everybody do this evening, but trying to just fit inside a vibe and play within a selected palette of notes that would just serve the music and make it listenable without taking away the freedom of expression. And he thought it would just be another recording, but it's still one of the most important records of all time of any genre. So we're gonna end tonight with, from Kind of Blue, a song entitled So What? And I heard a rumor, I don't know if this is true, I can't prove it, because like I said, I wasn't there. But I read things and talked to people that said that the beginning of So What, where you hear the bass and piano together, that slow kind of rubato thing, that was a Gil Evans contribution to So What. I don't know if he was in the studio or if Miles just took some sheet music off of Gil's desk one day, or if he said, hey, what can we do at the beginning of the song? I'm not sure. But if you listen to it and you go back and listen to The Birth of the Cool, it sounds very much like Gil Evans. So we're going to play So What, and the intro by Gil Evans is going to feature our bassist and piano player, Christian Dillingham, and Adam Manis. This is So What. That's Christian Dillingham on the bass. That's my brother from another mother, Mr. Clifton Wallace on the drums. We ran out of time. I didn't get to say this, but this is really important. Every era of Miles has met me in my development as a musician, and that's because Miles comes from the blues. St. Louis is a blues city, and East St. Louis too. Miles, you know, he had the blues in his plan, but every stage, he was in the Jimi Hendrix, the blues. He was in the Sly Stone, the blues. He was in the Prince, the blues. Okay, so we didn't get to play Blues by Five by Red Garland, but just know Miles comes from the blues, and that's important. This is Mr. Adam Manis on the piano. Hey-yo. St. Louis's own Mr. Kendrick Smith on the tenor saxophone, baritone saxophone. Mr. Carlos Scooter Brown on the alto saxophone. My name is Quentin Coxum. Thank you so much for listening to us tonight. Huge thank you to Jazz St. Louis and Victor Goins and Pops for having us, bringing a hometown boy back to his hometown and let me do my thing. We hope you enjoyed this tonight. Y'all take care of each other. Have a great rest of your evening. Thank y'all so much. Have a great night.